Let's take this show on the road. Same-ish, different day. I'll be bored out my mind. Hometown, love my place.
Hey friends, let's dye some yarn. Today we are going to dye some DK weight superwash merino. We've got 2 skeins of that here. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to soak it to make sure the yarn gets all wet. You don't want to dry yarn when you are dyeing. Dry patches does not catch the dye. So I'm adding about half a tablespoon of citric acid to my bowl. Set that aside. And I'm going to add water. This is cold water. That's 2 liters. And let's do another one. That's more than enough to soak these 2 skeins. You just need enough water for the skeins to soak completely. And now we're going to open up each skein, like so. And I'm adding zip ties to them. This helps to prevent them tangling while soaking, dyeing, and rinsing. These are reusable zip ties. You can find those on Amazon. Highly recommend. And we're doing the second skein and just adding in the zip tie for that one as well. And next we're just going to put the yarn in the water. Like so. And I'm pushing it down to make sure everything gets soaked. There we go. Now I'm going to let it sit for at least half an hour and then we'll be ready to dye. The yarn is soaked and ready to go. And we are going to be dyeing in this small pan, small canteen today. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add about a tablespoon, just under a tablespoon of citric acid to the dyeing pan as well. And I'm adding about 2 liters of water as well. I've only got 2 skeins, so that should be enough. And now we are going to add in the soaked yarn. I'm just squeezing out some of the water so I don't make a mess everywhere. I'm just adding it in the pan, like so. And the other one. And there we go. Now we're going to turn on the stove and we're going to start heating up the water and the yarn. While heating the pan, I will be turning it around, making sure it gets heated everywhere. We want all of the water and all of the yarn to be completely heated. If there are some patches that are cold, the dye is not going to stick to the yarn in those spaces. And I also use my spoon to poke around, make sure the hot water spreads everywhere. Just gently moving the yarn about. I'm not distressing it too much. The water is starting to heat up now. We're not looking for it to boil, we just want it to be really hot. And the way I check if the water has heated up properly is I just put on a glove and I just poke it. Do not recommend that you do this. Find your own method that works for you. This is how I do it. We're going to let it heat up a couple of minutes more and then we are going to start our dye. The yarn has heated up completely and actually it's almost boiling, so I had to turn off the stove completely. What we're going to do now, we're going to remove some of the water because we're going to do speckles and we can't have the yarn be submerged. So I'm just removing some of the water here. It is still sitting on a hot plate, so we need to be careful that it doesn't burn. This is an electric stove, so it's still going to be hot for quite a while. Even after having turned it off, it's not like a gas stove for those of you who have that. I'm just removing water. I'm going to take that a little more. Or just a small amount of water in the pan. Because we are going to sprinkle. I was thinking we would do a birthday cake today. Or maybe Christmas cake rather. Because, let me show you what we are going to dye with today. Just going to poke down a little bit. So, try to avoid any big pools of water. We are actually going to use sprinkles. I have this container of Christmas sprinkles left over from last Christmas. And this is just sugar and color, so it's absolutely fine to dye with. It could be a fun project with your kids, maybe. And I wanted to remove some of the water because if there are puddles of water in here, the color is just going to poof out. And we're going to try to make some sprinkles. We'll see if we can do it. So I'm just going to add in the sprinkles on top. Like so. You don't need to wear a mask or anything for this. There we go. And now I'm going to put a lid on so that we make use of the steam also that is produced in there. We're just going to let it sit for a few minutes and we'll see what we got. The yarn has been sitting under lid for a while. And we can see there's starting to be a little bit of red, a little bit of green here and there. It's very faint colors. It's probably not a very heavy dye in these sprinkles, but we're getting some reds and some greens. Now we're going to put the lid on. I'm going to set it aside to cool completely. And then we're going to rinse it. And it's important that it gets to cool completely before you start rinsing, otherwise you will shock the yarn. So I'll be back when it's time to rinse. I want to check on the yarn. Just now it's been sitting for a while, it is still hot. And what I'm seeing is that the red spots of dye is just completely disappearing. And there's not a lot of dye or a lot of color from the greens either. So that's just goes to show you that you may be able to sprinkle dye yarn with American sprinkles. Scandinavian, Europeans, or at least Scandinavians, you cannot. We have very, very strict rules for the dyes that we are able to use. So it doesn't work as well. So what we're going to do is going to go in with acid dye because the pan is still hot. So I'm just going to make use of that and sprinkle some red and some green. I've got some Jacquard acid dye in the color Fire Red. And I have got same brand, the color Spruce. And always when working with acid dyes or the powdered dyes, use a mask to protect your airways. This is a very fine powder and you do not want to accidentally inhale it. So I'm going to put my mask on. And we are going to sprinkle. I'm going to start with the red one. Looks like this. And I'm just going to grab a little bit, put it in my hand, like so. And we're going to sprinkle. We're very gently doing this. There we go. And we're going to go in with the spruce, which is a dark green, but it looks more like almost dark red in the can. Okay, and we're going to sprinkle. There we go. Still some heat left here, so I'm going to put on the lid. And I'm going to set it aside to let it cool completely before we rinse the yarn. The yarn has cooled completely and we are going to rinse it. I usually use just soap when I'm rinsing my yarns, but this time I'm going to use a little bit of dish soap because since we attempted to dye with sprinkles, which sadly didn't work very well, it's a lot of sugar in here as well. So I'm going to add dish soap today to the rinsing water. I'm just adding cold water to my bowl here. And it is clean, it's just stained inside. So we're adding some cold water. I'm holding off on adding the dish soap because I don't want too much suds. I just want the soap. Adding a little bit more. There we go, and now I'm adding in the dish soap. There we go. And I'm just grabbing one of the zip ties and squeezing out the water. And the bowl, and I can feel it is slightly sticky from all the sugar. There we go. Pour out the water. And I'll set that aside. There we go. I'm going to rinse that. I'm just gonna poke it down. I don't want to agitate it too much because I don't want it to tangle. And I'm grabbing a zip tie. I'm going to be dunking it. So, and squeeze out the water. And the other one. I'm not wringing it, I'm just squeezing out the water. There we go. Pouring this out. Now I'm going to add some lukewarm water because since this yarn is superwash, I can do that. I just have to be careful. You do not want to use hot water, excuse me. And usually you only use cold water. The only reason I'm heating it up a little bit, it's the same temperature as my skin, is to make sure I get all the sugar out. And again, it's only because this is a superwash yarn. If it was untreated wool, you would shock it. You cannot do that. There we go. And I'm adding the skeins back in. And again, this is not warm. It's just lukewarm. It's the same temperature as my skin. Since we used sugar on this yarn. I want it to dissolve completely. There we go. We're dunking it again. There we are. And once more. And squeezing out the water. There we go. Now we're going to hang this to dry. And I just use a regular clothing rack and hang it. It will take a couple of days. I just turn it about after 24 hours, just to make sure I move the zip tie so that you don't get the folded yarn in the same spot all the time because it takes a long time to dry. So I'll shift it around like so. So I'm going to hang that to dry and I'll be back with the finished result. It doesn't always turn out the way you plan to. With this one we had to go in with dye as the sprinkles didn't have enough color in themselves. But you can see here and there, there's a little bit of those, the sprinkles. But I'm really happy with what we got from just using the dye instead. A lot more powerful color. And again, if you live in the US, you can probably use sprinkle to dye your yarns. In Europe and Scandinavia, we have very, very rigorous rules about color in food. And they're simply not allowed to use stuff that is powerful enough to actually dye yarn. But now we know. So if you try to dye with sprinkles yourself, I'd love to see it. Tag me in social media. Also, if you make something with your yarn, tag me. And also, let me know how your process goes. Could you find sprinkles that were actually able to dye the yarn properly? I'd love to know. So that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next one.